There are a number of game-changing ideas in the field of sales and marketing that can transform how effectively you persuade your customer. In this episode of the Change Your Minds podcast, I want to walk you through 14 incredible insights from top people like Robert Cialdini, Dan Pink, Chris Voss, Seth Godin, Zoe Chance, to help you understand what are some of the most critical things that you can do and critical ideas that will allow you to be able to be a lot more impactful in your sales and in your marketing. In this episode, we're going to look at some of the most important insights ever created in these fields. And by the end of it, you're going to walk away with a really good understanding, not just of what ideas can help you to be better, but also which books to dive into. But for now, it's time for another Big Ideas series. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we're going to be looking at sales, marketing, and persuasion. Because what I'm going to be doing is walking you through some of the most important elements that you need to know in terms of becoming more persuasive, becoming more effective in terms of sales, becoming more effective in terms of marketing. And we're going to start with a book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. This is a really fun book. And what it's about is how do you make your message sticky? And by that is big ideas or great powerful ideas don't necessarily survive because they're true. They survive because they're sticky. And the idea is, how can you make your ideas more sticky? There's a simple framework in it, success without the last S, which stands for simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and story. So in order for an idea to stick, it should be simple, very easy for people to consume, very easy for people to understand. It should be unexpected, not like common knowledge that everybody knows, but something that is a bit counterintuitive and therefore unexpected. It should be something that is concrete, as it is not just high up there in the clouds, hard to make tangible. It should be something that's credible and you're able to back it up clearly. It should be something that impacts them emotionally, so makes them feel a certain way. And it should also have a story attached. So the more that you can use stories to be able to put forward your message, the more likely those messages will become sticky. So once again, Made to Stick is really about how to craft the most persuasive message. And the idea is that the ideas that stick really need to impact how people feel and need to be simple enough for people to consume. And when you're able to put together that success framework, you're much more likely to gain traction and to build buy-in in the folks that you're communicating with, which is critically important. Next, we have the book Influence by Robert Cialdini. Dr. Robert Cialdini, this is a book that I've talked about many, many, many times. It is the book that I've probably gifted more to people than any other book. And he walks through the 7 principles of influence, which come down to scarcity, social proof, liking, authority, reciprocity, consistency or commitment and consistency, and then last but not least, unity. And in a nutshell, what Dr. Cialdini really talks about is that we don't have to think through every request. We have these kind of triggers, these shortcuts that occur whenever these different patterns are used. Now, Cialdini emphasizes how important it is to be ethical and to make sure that you're doing the right thing in the right way to help people effectively. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is leverage the power of these kind of insights to be as effective as you possibly can be. Now, I'll talk really quickly through them. Reciprocity is that when you give to other people, it makes people feel more likely to want to give back to you. And when you get someone to do something small for you, they want to be consistent with that action. Therefore, they're more likely to do something bigger. So ask them for a small request. It's easier to ask them for something bigger after they've done that. Liking, the more people like you, the more likely they are to be persuaded by you. And again, liking can be created by connecting with people, finding ways that you're similar or complimenting them sincerely and being kind to them. Authority means that you're demonstrating your pedigree, your expertise, your experience, some sort of trappings of authority, as we call it, so that they perceive you as an expert, as someone who has authority in that context, and therefore they're more likely to acquiesce to your suggestions. We also have scarcity, which is the harder something is to get, the more we want it. And then social proof, the more other people tell you it's good, the more likely you are to believe it is good as well. And then last but not least, something that Dr. Cialdini talked about only since 2016 or so, the notion of unity. And that is whenever we feel like we're in the same group as somebody, we're much more likely to be persuaded by them. Whenever we feel we're in the same group, either because we're part of the same social group or familial group, or sometimes it's a case of when we work together, when we collaborate with them, and that collaboration can actually help us to feel that sense of unity. So if you're able to create that experience for people where you're using or leveraging these 7 principles, it creates an automatic impact and makes them significantly more likely to say yes. We also have Dr. Cialdini's other book, Persuasion, which really looks at how the battle of influence is won before you actually meet them. And the key is that if you can set the context effectively, a lot of times, a lot of research, he quotes here that connects to priming. So getting people into the right frame of mind, and also, of course, using the 7 principles before you meet them. But you can create the right conditions, which make people significantly more likely to say yes. Highly recommend getting your hands on these first 3 books, right? Made to Stick is excellent, but especially Influence and Persuasion. I'm telling you, this will make a huge impact on how successfully you're able to influence other people. It doesn't matter if you're in sales, in marketing, or if you just want to be a better communicator. Influence and Persuasion are both gold. The next one is another classic, Drive by Dan Pink. Dan Pink has written a number of great books about regret, about different topics. And we'll talk about one of his other books a little later on. But in Drive, he's really focused on motivation. And motivation, he has a different perspective than the typical conventional look of motivation, is that you motivate people by giving them rewards, right? And making them feel good about what you want them to do. And while that works in certain contexts, what Dan Pink suggests is he goes, no, look, we need to focus more on intrinsic motivation. And he looks at a lot of the science behind this. So it's not just something that Dan has made up. He's quoting some of the most useful insights and frameworks around motivation. And in his main thesis, he talks about the importance of intrinsic motivation, particularly around tasks that are requiring a bit more skill, requiring a bit more creativity. We tend to be more motivated by intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is when the motivation comes from inside of you. You want to do it for your own reasons, whereas extrinsic motivation is you do it for reward specifically. You do it for money, and they're outside external rewards that you get. And not only does he focus on intrinsic motivation, but he also dives into the 3 elements, as he describes it, of intrinsic motivation, where instead of thinking about the carrot and the stick rewards, intrinsic, as I mentioned, is coming from you. And it comes down to autonomy, feeling a sense of control, where we have agency, we're directing our own lives in some way, mastery, where we feel we're getting better at something that matters, and then purpose, that we're serving something deeper. So if you want to motivate people effectively, then you can leverage autonomy, mastery, and purpose effectively. You can find, how can I make it so that this person feels a sense of autonomy in executing on whatever task I'm asking them to execute on? Or how can I help this person see how this product can create a sense of autonomy for them, or can help them to master something, or can serve their overall purpose in some way? Now, you want to make sure that you're legitimate. You want to make sure from an ethical standpoint that what you're suggesting or promising is actually true. So if you say that this will give them more autonomy, it needs to. But the key is that these are the kinds of things that will tend to motivate them successfully as a result. So definitely recommend getting your hands on Drive as well. And sometimes you could find like videos that summarize these, which are cool, but there's nothing better than reading the actual book. And if you're going to get, by the way, the Cialdini book, the Influence book, get one of the later versions, the 2021 version, I think it is, because that has all 7 principles. Some of the older versions only have the initial 6. The next one is The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr. Will Storr is a really great writer, has written about status, has written about stories, a couple of books and stories, which we're going to talk about now. But The Science of Storytelling is one of them. And The Science of Storytelling is pretty much talking about how our brains are wired for story. And this is something you've heard me say many times, something people have been talking about for many years. But he looks at how we're naturally connected to stories, and it's almost like we always see ourselves as a protagonist struggling with status, struggling with control, struggling with meaning. And the idea of grand narratives as well is something he touches on, but it's an excellent sort of exploration of story. And while it wouldn't be as, let's say, directly practical in some ways as some of the other books that we're talking about here, once you grasp and truly understand story, it becomes an incredible vehicle for your messaging. So that's one of the better books out there on understanding the science of story. And he has a follow-up book called The Story is a Deal. And the main concept of this is the story is an implicit deal, where it's like, give me your attention and I'll give you payoffs. And the payoffs will be status payoffs, emotional payoffs. You'll feel better and be better as a result of listening to the story. You'll learn valuable insights from the story. You know, if you read a biography, you learn from that person's life experience. whenever you hear a story, there's lots of benefits there, not just the benefits you get while you're listening, but the benefits that you get after you finish the story itself. And one of the most important elements that Will Storr talks about is the importance of recognizing that you can have an identity upgrade. So you can become a better person as a result. And if you decide to go in that direction, this is what it will mean for you. It will give you a sense of status. It will give you a sense of meaning. It will give you a sense of connection. There's certain great things that we can get as a direct result of it. And stories are a wonderful way to communicate that. So a story as a deal is that we have certain expectations when we hear a story, and the payoffs can be something that we get there and then while we listen to it in terms of emotionally, but also they will inspire us and teach us how we can move forward as well. So your skill in storytelling is one of the most crucial things that you need to work on. And I definitely recommend checking out the site Storytelling and A Story is a Deal to learn more from Will Storr. See that right? So it's pretty cool. Next, we have The Crowd. This is an old school one, The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon. And this is, the big idea is that whenever a lot of people get together, they get into what he calls a collective mind, and they're driven more by vivid images. They're driven more by contagion, exaggerated emotion, hype, than they are driven by reasoning, right? So one of the things that explains so much of what's going on in the world today, never mind what went on in the world over the last 100 years with the rise of Nazi Germany, for instance, was the ability that leaders have to be able to influence a massive amount of people. And Gustave Le Bon was one of the earliest people that described this. This is in the 19th century, I'm talking. He described how when an individual joins a crowd, all of a sudden, it's like they move away from their conscious mind and they embrace a sort of a collective mind. And therefore, they're not as reasonable or rational as they might be when they're individual. And we kind of know that implicitly. We've seen it. There's a lot of psychological research in the 20th and 21st century that kind of backs this up. I talk about it in my new book as well. But Gustave Le Bon was the original sort of, or one of the original people that had an entire sort of thesis about how that worked. And the book is called The Crowd. So I definitely recommend that as something to check out as well. We also have Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And what I like about this is that Chris Voss is a former hostage negotiator, some great insights there. And the insights aren't just good if you're doing hostage negotiation. I'm not sure how many of you would be doing that as your main job, but I do know that this also helps you in all sorts of negotiation. And the concept of never split the difference is, instead of like focusing on how much can I grab, how can I manipulate the other person to be able to give me more of what I need, instead you're thinking about what's the end goal here. The key is to use techniques he calls tactical empathy to be able to really connect with people, make them feel psychologically safe. Things like mirroring, where you repeat the last few words they've said, or labeling, where you say things like, it seems to me like this is how you're feeling, and questions, which is really trying to understand how they're experiencing things and helping them to guide you in terms of what's the solution to the problem that is there. There's all sorts of techniques in the book. The key is that when you can get people to feel psychologically safe, it's easier for you to be able to make traction with them. It's easier for you to be able to negotiate with them. It's also easier for you to understand their hidden needs as well, when you can create a safe space for them in that way as well. Influence is Your Superpower by Zoe Chance kind of resonates with this theme in it. Zoe talks about how influence is not about clever arguments. It's about lowering resistance and being able to ask clearly for what it is that you're looking for. She talks about, I think, the gator brain versus the judge brain, and kind of a little bit like System 1, System 2 by Danny Kahneman. But the key is that simple asks sometimes matter more than perfect logic. It's not necessary to be always having all of your reasonable arguments structured perfectly. A lot of the times it's about quick decisions made. So the key is, how can you make it so that it's easy for people to say yes, as opposed to how can I make this perfect argument completely airtight? Because more often than not, people's decisions aren't based upon airtight arguments. They're based upon initial feelings that they have at the very beginning. But excellent book, lots of really great stuff, and Influence is Your Superpower. Then To Sell is Human is our friend Dan Pink again. What he talks about here is that we're pretty much all in the sales world. This was written a number of years ago. We're all in sales, and it's not about a salesy type selling where you are trying to convince people to do this. Sometimes sales is a bad reputation. But he talks more about the fact that it's more about problem finding as opposed to just solving their problem. It's helping them to understand how you can bring value, how you can serve them in this way. And he talks about an ABC model where it's attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. And attunement is when you adjust to their perspective. Buoyancy is whenever you're able to change the way in which you respond to rejection. And then clarity is helping them to see the problem that they have and helping them to uncover what is it that they need in order for you to then be able to help them from that perspective. So some really good stuff there when it comes to conversations that you might have in terms of sales, but really conversations you might have in a lot of different contexts. Then we have a number of books from Seth Godin. We have, first of all, Permission Marketing. And the big idea here is that the most valuable asset in terms of marketing is permission. And this is a privilege of being able to deliver anticipated, personal, and relevant messages to those people who want to hear from you. And by anticipated, he means they look forward to hearing from you. So in other words, you want to create permission marketing to the point that when you send an email, they're like excited to get it, for instance. Personal means it feels directed to them, not a mass, so it doesn't feel like it's like a generic email sent to everyone. It feels like it's speaking directly to them. And then relevant is it actually speaks to something that they care about. And if you can make sure that your email communication, that your podcasts, that your social media is anticipated, they're looking forward to it, it's personal and it's relevant, then you're much more likely to gain traction, especially if you're in the area of being a thought leader or you are a solopreneur and whatnot. So definitely highly recommend Permission Marketing. I think it really hits the nail on the head. Another book by Seth Godin is Purple Cow. This comes from, I think, an 1895 comic by Burgess. And the notion of a purple cow is something that Seth uses to describe something that stands out. And he says the problem is that most people are trying to be pretty good. And even if you're very good, oftentimes being very good or being good enough is invisible. Instead, you need to be what he calls remarkable, and only remarkable products, only remarkable ideas spread. So how can you become more remarkable? Many years ago, I spoke at an event with Seth, and it was really on that theme of what it means to be remarkable. And he did an incredible presentation on what it means to be remarkable. I did a presentation earlier in that day, first thing in the morning, actually, on how to become sort of indispensable. And the notion of being remarkable is something that I think is best positioned when you look at the most successful brands out there, right? There's something about them that stand out. And in many ways, this is what we need to do when we're in the space of thought leadership, right? You're trying to make it so that you position yourself. And standing out isn't always about being better than others. Oftentimes, standing out is just about being different, being unique, and making sure people can clearly see it. Purple cows aren't necessarily the best cows, right? They're just purple. Right? There's lots of different types of cows. Sometimes, gray cows are better than purple cows. I'm just saying. But purple cows stand out more, therefore purple cows get more attention. And so we have to understand, is there ways that we can paint ourselves more purple? I think you get what I'm talking about, I'm sure. Anyway, then we have This is Marketing by Seth Godin again. And this is about marketing is the act of making change happen by serving a specific audience in a story that help them to become who they want to be. Very straightforward, lovely description of what marketing is all about. And it's about starting with the smallest viable audience, not the mass market. It's about being specific, understanding the worldview, the tension that they have, and then offering a story and product that helps them to resolve that tension in line with who they are. Beautifully simple structure. If you ever go to Seth's blog, he really clearly articulates everything so perfectly with such an economy of words. He's a pleasure to read. And then Linchpin is another book by Seth that I'll also touch on finally, which is in a world of, I suppose, replaceable cogs. The safest strategy is to become a linchpin. This is somebody who brings creativity, who brings initiative, who isn't just doing what's standard. And especially in a world with AI and with the ability to be able to scale massively, it's really important that we're leveraging the power of our humanity, the power of our uniqueness, the power of our creativity. And there's a form of human creativity that I think is different to AI creativity. AI can be great in terms of creating potential ideas, but it's the creativity of humans and the ability to make great judgments about that creativity. That's one of the things that I think gives us, still at least to this day, gives us a great edge. So becoming a linchpin means allowing yourself to become someone who brings the work of creativity and initiative, emotional labor to the table so you could really start to create something amazing. And so these 14 different ideas. We started off, we talked about make to stick, the importance of getting your message sticky, the 7 principles of persuasion by Cialdini, how to ensure that you're setting the context and building the right conditions for persuasion through his amazing book, Persuasion. Drive by Dan Pink talks about the importance of intrinsic motivation, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. We have The Sides of Storytelling, The Story is a Deal, book by Will Storr, which really dives into how stories work and why they matter. We have The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon, which talks about once people are in a group, they tend to have a group mind. We talk about Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, the importance of tactical empathy, creating psychological safety, and really creating the right conditions to understand what people actually want. We have Influence is Your Superpower by Zoe Chance. The key there is to make sure that you're able to lower the resistance and ask clearly so that people can feel safe about saying yes. To Sell as the Human is about fundamentally creating an environment where people are able to see the problems that they're facing. So you're really helping them to gain clarity. And as a result of that, they're getting clear about what they need and therefore they want your help. Then we have Permission Marketing by Seth Godin, really one of my favorites. The importance of recognizing that it's a privilege to be able to serve people, and the privilege is about delivering anticipated, personal, and relevant messages. When they hear from you, they're delighted. It feels personal to them. And it's also very relevant to exactly what they need at this moment in time. Purple Cow, you need to stand out. This is marketing. It's about creating a story that really speaks to their specific worldview and pain points and aligns with their identity. And then finally, last but not least, linchpin, you need to make sure that you become the kind of person that brings initiative and creativity to the table. Even more important in the AI world. So they are 14 big ideas on selling and marketing better. I really hope you found that useful. I hope you found that insightful. But for now, take care, be well. May the forces always be with you. And get yourself some of these books. I'm telling you, you will be delighted that you got them. Bye for now.